Ladies and gentlemen, a new and critical scandal is unfolding within the European Union, and this time, the situation appears far more dire than usual. Hungary, led by its resolute Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, who has long been at odds with Brussels, has announced its decision to veto the extension of sanctions against Russia. These are the same sanctions that European bureaucrats consistently renew, operating under the belief that each round will deal a devastating blow to the Russian economy. However, to date, the tangible destruction has seemed more visible within Europe itself, though this reality is rarely discussed openly. The current sanctions are set to expire on January 31st, and without a unanimous decision from all 27 member states, they cannot be renewed. Yet Hungary, a relatively small but fiercely independent country, has stood its ground, refusing to comply with what Orbán views as a futile collective exercise. Rejecting this ritual, Orbán has openly declared that sanctions should be abandoned altogether and that Europe should re-establish unrestricted relations with Russia. This bold move has left European politicians in a state of shock, scrambling to devise a solution. If the member states fail to reach an agreement by January 27, the sanctions will legally lapse on February 1, creating a highly precarious situation. The potential lapse of sanctions has thrown the European business community into confusion. If the legal framework for sanctions disappears, companies will face a complex dilemma. Should they resume trade with Russia or wait for further directives from Brussels? Economists and analysts have long warned that these sanctions are doing more harm to Europe than to Russia. The European Economic Centre reports that since the sanctions were imposed, the EU economy has lost approximately €400 billion, while Russia has managed to adapt, establishing robust trade ties with Asia and minimizing its economic losses. Hungary has now become the first EU nation to openly acknowledge the failure of the sanctions policy. French economist Jean-Michel Lambert has articulated what many have hesitated to say publicly: the sanctions have failed. Furthermore, Germany's industrial leaders have expressed similar frustrations. Wolfgang Hellmann, president of the German Association of Machine Builders, has emphasized that the German economy is already suffering due to the energy crisis, the loss of the Russian market, and rising inflation. Any further tightening of sanctions could potentially lead to the collapse of numerous businesses across Europe. So, why has Viktor Orbán decided to take such a radical step now? For years, Hungary has been under financial pressure from the EU, with Brussels freezing funds earmarked for Budapest under the pretense of alleged democratic backsliding. Officially, the EU claims that Orbán's government is not upholding European values, such as judicial independence and minority rights. However, the underlying reason appears to be Orbán's insistence on pursuing an independent national policy. He has frequently opposed EU sanctions and has resisted providing unconditional military support to Ukraine, openly stating that the conflict is not Hungary's concern. Instead, he has advocated for direct negotiations with Russia, bypassing Brussels. Orbán's opposition has exposed cracks in the EU's unified front. Hungarian political analyst Tamás Molnár has pointed out that Orbán's actions directly challenge the very foundation of the EU's sanctions policy. Orbán has also consistently criticized the EU for what he sees as its embrace of leftist radicalism and its disregard for national identity. In his latest speeches, Orbán has made it clear that this is not merely a disagreement over specific policies such as migration, sovereignty, or sanctions, but a larger ideological battle for the future of Europe itself. He aims to lead this fight by rallying conservative forces across the continent who are disillusioned with the EU's current trajectory. The support Orbán is garnering is not confined to Hungary alone. Political leaders and analysts in countries such as France, Italy, and Germany have echoed similar sentiments. French MEP Gilles Le Breton has even suggested that Orbán is the first leader to successfully challenge the so-called dictatorship of Brussels, potentially paving the way for others to follow. Meanwhile, rumors in Washington suggest that the US may be preparing a deal to end the conflict in Eastern Europe, which could involve lifting some sanctions against Russia. This scenario has emboldened Orbán, who appears to be positioning Hungary as a mediator between Russia and Europe. Adding to this dynamic is the shifting political landscape in the United States. The presidency of Donald Trump, coupled with the increasing influence of Elon Musk in European politics, has provided indirect support to Orbán's stance. Musk has notably expressed sympathy for right-wing conservative movements in Europe, using his platform to challenge mainstream European policies. For example, his recent interview with Alice Weidel, leader of Germany's Alternative for Germany, AfD, party, sparked outrage in German political circles. In this interview, Weidel criticized Germany's sanctions against Russia, its energy policies, and its handling of migration issues, calling for a return to pragmatic relations with Moscow. Musk's support for such voices has alarmed the European political establishment. Beyond Germany, Musk has shown interest in other right-wing leaders, such as Nigel Farage in the UK, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, and Marine Le Pen in France. Orbán, recognizing the momentum, has held strategic meetings with these figures, seeking to form a coalition of like-minded leaders. In Budapest, Orbán recently called for the creation of a conservative international to combat what he describes as the liberal and globalist propaganda emanating from Brussels. This coalition, he argues, is essential to preserving Europe's cultural and national identity. The European Union, however, is not standing idle. Discussions are underway about imposing new sanctions on Hungary, potentially including freezing EU funds or even stripping Hungary of its voting rights in the Council of Europe. Guy Verhofstadt, a vocal advocate for deeper European integration, has warned that Orbán's actions risk leading Hungary out of the EU and could inspire a broader anti-globalist coalition capable of dismantling the Union. Despite these threats, Orbán remains undeterred. He continues to criticize the EU's policies, asserting that they have led to economic decline and a loss of sovereignty for member states. Polls in Hungary show strong public support for Orbán's stance, with many Hungarians opposing the EU's increasing powers over migration and social policy. Meanwhile, right-wing movements across Europe, in Austria, Germany, and beyond, are gaining traction, capitalizing on growing dissatisfaction with the EU's handling of economic and social issues. The future of Europe hangs in the balance. Will the EU maintain its current trajectory, or will the rise of conservative forces usher in a new era of national sovereignty and pragmatic policies? As the political landscape evolves, one thing is clear. Viktor Orbán's rebellion has sparked a crisis that could redefine the European Union for generations to come.